There were numerous strategies the Union and Confederacy used to spy on each other during the Civil War. Of course, there was the more traditional method of dressing somebody up and sending them over to the enemy's side, but that is boring. Instead, I'll be talking about these three methods commonly used in the Civil War, starting with the balloon. The balloons were first used by the French during the Revolutionary Wars, where they established the French Aerostatic Corps, who pioneered using balloons in war. Now back to the Civil War, where this man, Theodore Low, wanted to use balloons to help the Union win the war. So after gaining Abraham Lincoln's trust, he agreed to let Low make the balloon corps for the Union Army. Low worked hard to create a good balloon, and after a while he created the Intrepid, which is one of the best balloons the Union had. These balloons are probably not like the ones you were thinking of, because instead of using hot air to make the balloon rise, the balloons the Union used had to be inflated with hydrogen, using hydrogen generators. Then two people were risen up into the sky where they could see miles out into the surrounding area. They would use this to easily find where enemies were. People in these balloons used a long telegraph wire attached to the side of the balloon to tell people at the ground what they saw, so they could know where to send troops, map the land, and direct artillery fire. Now, the Confederate balloon program was much less developed than the Union's. Because of material shortages, their balloons were often made out of silk dresses. They also often had to use flags to signal Morse code due to a lack of a good telegraph system. The Confederates didn't put the balloons to good use. However, they did launch a balloon off a barge, essentially creating the first aircraft carrier. One famous use of the balloons was during the siege of Yorktown, where the Union was hesitant to attack because they thought Yorktown was heavily occupied by the Confederates, when in reality it was not. So the Union used this opportunity to attack. Now, the next spy method on the list is the telegraph wiretapper. The telegraph sends a pulse of electricity every time someone pressed the button on it, which could be received by someone on the other end. They would use these to send messages in the form of Morse code. And this device was revolutionary for both commercial and military use. Abraham Lincoln was a big fan of the telegraph, so he created the Union's Telegraph Corps. And this corps constructed over 15,000 miles of telegraph lines, some even stretching across battlefields. These telegraph lines transferred important information between government facilities like the White House and War Department buildings. The Confederates tried to make good use of the telegraph, but their telegraph infrastructure was much smaller than the Union's, mainly because most of the people that could use Morse code were from the Union. So once the war started, they moved back to the Union, leaving the Confederacy with almost no one to use the telegraphs. This put the Confederacy at a disadvantage, as getting information across long distances took much longer. Now, finally, to talk about wiretapping. Wiretapping is relatively simple. All you had to do was connect a wire to the enemy's telegraph lines, and you could send and receive messages on that wire. The Union put this practice to good use. Near the end of the war, Confederate General Lee's army was low on supplies and desperately needed a resupply. But no resupply ever came, because the Union telegraph operators had tapped in the Confederate telegraph lines and were telling resupply units to go to random places, which ultimately led to Lee's surrender at Appomattox. To combat the enemy side spying on their telegrams, they used the third spy item on our list, the Cypher Disc. Cypher Disc could shift or change the letters in a message that makes it impossible to decipher without a cipher key. This made telegraph messages more secure, because instead of sending the raw message through them, they sent the encrypted message. The Union used Stager's telegraphic cipher that rearranged the letters of a message instead of replacing them with different letters. On the other hand, the Confederates used the Vengerine cipher, which used a keyword to shift each letter of the message by a different amount. But this method is not as secure, because the Union was eventually able to guess their keywords.